March 18th, 2020. I checked my account balance using my online banking program, and there it is, my first Social Security payment sent to my account today. I guess that makes me officially old. March 14th, 1972. Promise me we'll grow old together, Bobby. I looked into those beautiful blue eyes. Jenny just gave me a birthday present, the best gift a woman can give a man. My gift to Jenny for her 18th birthday last month now seemed pitiful in comparison. Jenny received a very small pearl hanging from a 14-karat gold chain. I received Jenny's virginity. Not only that, Jenny took my virginity at the same time. It was just after school. Her parents were still at work. We were cuddling on her double bed with all 30 stuffed animals looking at us as Jenny explained what we were going to do on this brilliant spring day. Bobby Long, I want to make love. This is my birthday present to you today. I could barely get the words out of my mouth. Jenny, we can't. I don't have condoms. Birthday gift number 2 is Jenny's answer. We won't need them. I started taking birth control pills 2 months ago when I planned to. So my first time with a woman happened in bed, not in the back seat of my car. After that, Jenny sat on the edge of the bed and watched me get dressed before her parents arrived. Her body was a work of absolute beauty. Jenny was 5'5" and 120 pounds with an athletic build, blue eyes, blonde hair, and small breasts that suited her compact body perfectly. Jenny and I started dating a year earlier when we were both juniors. She was a cheerleader and one of the most sought-after girls in our school. She was the girl who was dating the captain of our soccer team, the girl who seemed unattainable while I sat on the bench waiting to play in the game. Throughout freshman year, I wanted to ask her out, but something always held me back. It's not that I wasn't a good-looking guy. Without boasting, I'll just say that I didn't have enough dates. By my freshman year, I was already 6 inches tall, and time spent in the gym had given me a decent physique. I had a 70s hairstyle and blue eyes like Jenny, and although I was a reserve player on the varsity football team, I was the starting third baseman and batting catcher on the baseball team. I took courage the day our baseball team won the conference championship. What gave me this courage? I was so excited after hitting a home run over the right field fence that nothing could stop me. As the team left the field in front of the cheerleaders and screaming student group, I stopped in front of Jenny. "Can I take you out for pizza tonight?" Jenny said yes, and that was it. From that day on, we were a couple. 10 months later, she gave me a birthday gift that sealed our love for each other. Jenny and I continued to make love for the remaining 2 months of high school, and then throughout the summer when our summer work schedules allowed us to get together. We experimented a bit, but looking back, I have to say it was all very vanilla. Vanilla and wonderful. I was accepted into a state university 50 miles from our hometown. Jenny took several classes at a local college and worked full-time as a secretary at a law firm. Every weekend I would come home and we would spend the weekend together. We were in love, and the only question was, when will we tie the knot? For Christmas that first year, I bought Jenny a promise ring. I had to endure the ridicule of other guys in the dormitory. I made friends with the girls from the Maiden Tower, which shared the common area of our dormitory, but it never went beyond conversations and friendship. My heart belongs to Jenny. The guys called me Bunny, etc. But I didn't let it take over me because, in the first place, Jenny was such a gorgeous woman that I knew most guys were just jealous. And secondly, while these guys were trying their best to get asleep, I was making the love of my life. By the end of the first summer after my freshman year, I had saved enough money to give Jenny a 1/4-carat diamond. With her father's permission, I asked Jenny to marry me before heading off to sophomore year. Jenny said yes. I have to add one thing. Although my father adored Jenny, he implied, without even saying it out loud, that he thought I was too young to devote myself to this for the rest of my life. And although I understood what he was saying, what are you going to do when you find that girl, even if you're just a teenager? It was spring break during my sophomore year, and Jenny and I joined a group of my college friends on a camping trip to Holland State Park on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan. We had a great time camping, cooking over the fire, telling scary stories by firelight and singing songs the girls had learned in their Girl Scout days. It was already after midnight when Jenny and I entered our tent with every intention of making love. Jenny was rummaging through her backpack. "I can't find my diaphragm. I know I put it here." Jenny had stopped taking the pills several months earlier due to side effects. We relied on the diaphragm as a contraceptive. I could ask Ted if he has a spare condom. Go ask Ted. I walked up to Ted and Kelly's tent and, as awkward as it was, asked Ted if he could give me a condom. Ted gave me one and I headed back to our tent. This was the first time Jenny and I used a condom, and I have to say I understood why some guys hate these things. It was just different. But Jenny and I made love and fell asleep. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up and Jenny was cuddled up to me for warmth. I started rubbing my hands on her back under the sweatshirt she was wearing. "I want to be inside you." We put on our sweatpants, cuddled, and fell asleep. The next morning after breakfast, Jenny and I drove to the nearest town, and I bought enough condoms to last me the whole week. Too little, too late. 4 weeks later, Jenny broke the news to me. "I'm late." Another 3 weeks later, she confirmed this after a visit to her doctor. June 10th, 1974. 2 weeks after my last exams, we became Mr. and Mrs. Robert Long. I was 20 years old. On December 29th, Robert Jr. was born, a healthy 8-pound boy. I finished my studies and Jenny, and I lived in student housing for couples. What a fun life it was. The building was filled with other couples, most of whom were in the same situation as Jenny and I, barely 20 years old, and with a child at that. We tried to make the most of our modest resources. We would gather with friendly neighbors in the backyard for a barbecue, most often involving hot dogs, and sometimes, on rare occasions, a cheap cut of steak. Remembering those days, I can't help but smile. These have been 2 difficult but wonderful years. My parents and Jenny's parents helped a little. I must say how surprised I was at the time. Her parents treated me with kindness, even though I got their daughter pregnant. Some fathers wouldn't be so understanding. I think it helped that this was their first grandchild and Jenny's mom did everything she could to spoil Bobby Jr. After graduating from high school, I took a job in the purchasing department of a local plant that supplied parts to various auto plants in Michigan. We also produced aftermarket parts. Things were going pretty well. I was making enough to support my family, and we had a few extra funds as Jenny's mom was looking after Bobby and Jenny was back at work at the law office. March 4th, 1980. There are many ways a spouse can find out about betrayal. Probably one of the most disgusting is when they tell you that you need to see a doctor and get tested for STDs. I was standing at the urinal, and the pain I felt when I urinated almost made me fall to my knees. I knew without any tests that soon I would have to tell my wonderful, faithful wife the same thing. Of course, it all started with innocent flirting between me and my colleague Lynn. Physically, Lynn had nothing that could beat Jenny. Even after Bobby was born, Jenny had a body that would appeal to 98% of girls in their 20s. But what Lynn had that Jenny didn't was a cunning tongue that inspired the wildest fantasies in my immature brain. Lynn hooked me the first time I had sex with her. She wasn't kidding when she talked about the crazy things she would do to me if we ever got it together. Our first sex was something like a scene from an adult movie. I missed several evening classes. I started making excuses for being away from home for 2 or 3 hours on the weekends. About 6 weeks into our affair, I walked into Lynn's apartment to find her on the couch with another man. I admit I was jealous and angry. Imagine I'm cheating on my wife, and then I'm angry because my girlfriend is with another man. I turned around and was about to leave when Lynn stopped me. "You have to come back, Bobby. If you do me this favor, next time I will give you the kind of pleasure that any man would die for." I returned to the apartment and destroyed the next few decades of my life. The other guy and I made love to Lynn for 3 hours. I was surprised that Lynn's neighbors didn't call the police. She screamed like one possessed. 2 weeks after this event, Lynn kept her promise. At her suggestion, I told my wife that I would be gone for a few hours that Saturday. When I arrived at Lynn's apartment, I wasn't too surprised to find another woman waiting for me with Lynn. 30 seconds later, we were all naked and having the naughtiest sex imaginable. 2 weeks after that wild day, I stood at the urinal with a burning sensation that pierced fiery pain. Before I finished peeing, I knew I was in trouble. I made an appointment at the clinic, they swabbed me, and given the high likelihood of infection, I filled out the county health forms. It turned out that I not only had gonorrhea, but also chlamydia. It would be several months before I could find out the results of the HIV tests. The look on my wife's face when I told her she needed to get tested for STDs will haunt me for the rest of my life. What kind of monster causes such harm to the person he seemingly loves? No matter how many times I apologized, no matter how many times I asked Jenny what I could do to atone for my betrayal, and showed my willingness to do anything to make amends, we could not get over the pain I caused her, and the loss of trust on which any marriage rests. We got divorced within a year, and guess what? I didn't deserve forgiveness, and what I did didn't deserve to be forgotten. There were people who tried to ease my conscience by making excuses for my behavior. You were too young when you got married. That bitch Lynn seduced you with her charms. You were with one woman, and any man will want to understand what he lost. These were all just excuses, bad excuses. I knew I was playing with fire, and I did the dirty deed anyway. Even though I was unfaithful and gave her an STD, Jenny was not vindictive in the division of property. She allowed me unlimited communication with Bobby Jr., of course. I was awarded child support and alimony to support her until she got married or could support herself. She was still working in the same law office, now as an assistant to the senior partner. I didn't stay in a shack and eat only beans. I could afford a car, a nice studio apartment, and a decent lifestyle. The only thing I can never get back is my family. I've heard people say that the best revenge is a life well lived. I doubt Jenny saw her life as revenge. She was too kind for that. I still spent every other weekend with my son, and for the first year after our divorce, there was not a single mention of another man in Jenny's life. This changed the following year. Bobby started talking about some Mr. Fry. I didn't bother asking, but the name came up from time to time. It turned out that Mr. Fry was John Fry, a young high school gym teacher whom Jenny was dating. I met John Fry one Sunday evening when I took Bobby to Jenny's house. This was a year and a half after our divorce, and at least 6 months after Bobby first mentioned his name. I'd like to say that this guy was a complete ass, but he definitely didn't give that impression when I first met him. He stood up to greet me, looked me in the eyes as we shook hands, his handshake firm but without seeming pressure, and he offered, "Nice to finally meet Bobby's dad." Jenny stood to the side, waiting for my reaction. All I could manage was a faint, "Nice to meet you," after which I turned and walked away to my car. 4 months later, Jenny married John Fry. It was a small ceremony held in the backyard of the house I once shared with Jenny and Bobby Jr. My boss called me into his office. "Robert, with Travis' retirement, we have decided to reduce his position, and we are placing you in charge of purchasing and logistics. Congratulations, you will receive a significant salary increase and the title of Assistant Vice President." For a 30-year-old, this was something impressive. Of course, I had a higher education and an MBA degree, but it was still a big responsibility. So even though my personal life was going downhill, my professional life was on the rise. It was a beautiful day in early June, when the weather had not yet become hot and humid like in summer. I was walking through the city center enjoying the sunshine when I saw them, Jenny and John walking towards me. It wasn't surprising to see a round belly. Bobby had told me that Jenny was pregnant, and he was looking forward to a brother or sister. I forgot to mention earlier how Jenny glowed while carrying Bobby. Jenny and John were holding hands, talking and looking at each other. Even though Jenny was looking at John, I saw this glow. Hoping that they didn't notice me, I quickly went into the nearest store. I was pretending to look at the goods on display, with my back to the door, when I heard her voice. "Bob, you could say hi. We share one son, you know." Jenny said this not in anger, but as a fact. I turned to her. I saw the surprise on her face when she saw the tears in my eyes. I quickly said, sorry, and walked out of the store, passing Jenny and John. The very next Monday, I applied for a transfer to another branch. It took 8 months, but a comparable location finally opened in our Florida plastics extrusion location. I left Michigan and moved 100 miles south to Jacksonville. I didn't leave Bobby. He spent the winter holidays and the whole summer with me, at least for a while. Florida wasn't bad. After living my first 31 years in the Midwest, I must admit that I enjoyed the ocean beaches, warmer winters, and a completely different attitude. I made new friends, including several nice women, and despite my northern accent, I was accepted into the new team. The years passed. I lived for the summer months when Bobby would come visit me and we could reconnect. I did my best to make these summers as interesting as possible, but everything fell apart during my 4th year of living in Florida. The phone rang, and it was Jenny on the other end, which wasn't unusual since we often had to discuss Bobby-related matters, and we were always polite. Bobby wants to talk to you, but he's very hesitant. He's been crying for 2 days now because he doesn't know what to do. In a matter of seconds, 1,000 thoughts flashed through my head. Are you trying to give me a hint as to what this is all about? Bobby was offered the opportunity to play on an elite baseball team this summer. This will reduce his time with you. He can't bring himself to ask you for it. What makes things even more difficult is that 2 of his best friends also play on the team. What do you think, Jenny? No, this is between you and your son. I will support everything whatever you 2 decide. Okay, thank you. Have Bobby call me tonight. This will give me time to think things over. We exchanged pleasantries like your mom and dad, like children, etc., and hung up. I spoke to Bobby that evening and agreed that he should join the team. He was already 13, which was much earlier than I expected or hoped. The summer promised to be long and lonely. Or not. I met my neighbor by chance while grocery shopping. I hadn't seen Earl Price for several weeks and asked where he had been. In Kenya, our church held a fundraiser. We raised over $16,000 to help South Sudan, and I volunteered, thanks to my wife and mother, to deliver canned goods and other supplies to where they needed to be collected in Kenya. What a mess. You'd think they'd be organized, pardon my French, but it took me 2 weeks to make sure our shipment was received by the right and go, even though everything should have been agreed upon months before. Earl belonged to one of those evangelical megachurches with several thousand members. He and his wife Tommy have invited me several times already, but I have so far declined. Looks like they need someone who knows logistics. It was a random comment, and I had no idea how one phrase could change a person's life. I was sitting on the back porch when the doorbell rang. Earl was on the threshold with 2 men I didn't know. I let them in, and Earl introduced me to his pastor, Nathan Strong, and a man from an NGO that Earl's church was associated with, a Mr. Jenkins. I offered them beer. Strong refused, but Earl and Jenkins agreed. I poured Strong some iced tea, and we returned to the veranda. Mr. Long, a man of your skills and experience, is exactly what we need to deliver food and medicine that could save countless lives. There is a war going on in Sudan, and as in many wars, not only soldiers are dying on the battlefield, but innocent women and children are suffering and dying. We are trying to help, we have money, but we lack knowledge. I did not consent that evening. I spent several days and nights talking with Earl and Jenkins. Eventually, I became convinced that I had to do it. So, 2 weeks later, I headed north, 1,100 miles to Kalamazoo, to say goodbye to my son. I met with Jenny and John to tell them I was leaving the country indefinitely. This was the first time I spent significant time with John, but from everything Bobby told me, I realized that he was a wonderful stepfather and role model. I asked John if he was ready to expand his role. I will write to Bobby, and, when possible, I will invite him to meet me in Europe, but it will not be the same. Will he be able to help Bobby when I can't? John agreed to do whatever it took to raise Bobby with Jenny. Just watching Jenny and John interact during the week I spent in Kalamazoo brought me relief. Bobby and I spent a good week together, and he assured me that he would be a good son to his mom and stepdad. 10 days later, I landed at Lokachojo Military Air Base, Kenya, in a restored DC-7. It will be 4 years before I return to the States. Lokachojo was crowded with missionaries, mercenaries, well-wishers of all kinds, refugees from Sudan, as well as refugees from the rest of the world. Refugees from Sudan were kept inside high steel fences, living in tents. The world's refugees were outside this fence, most of us living in prefabricated houses that could be considered luxury housing in this region. The camp was like a small town, except there were few children or anyone over 60 outside the fence. The male-to-female ratio wasn't that bad, as many of the doctors, missionaries, and of course nurses were women. Some of them were quite promiscuous, and after my experience with Lynn and her friend Nancy, I tried to avoid these women as much as I could, and when I couldn't, I used condoms very carefully. I once read that during the plague in Milan in the Middle Ages, the living could often be caught copulating in cemeteries. I think in some ways we were doing the same thing, affirming our survival in the face of so much death and suffering. I immediately took responsibility for controlling supplies and distributing the piles of aid scattered throughout the airfield. Within a month of my arrival, according to the people who seemed to be in charge of this chaos, the situation began to improve. Twice as many supplies began reaching people in targeted villages in South Sudan. Half of the supplies were lost due to shrinkage. A typical week included 6 11-hour workdays. There was minimal entertainment, except for 3 or 4 makeshift bars around the camp. It was in one of these bars that I met Claudia. Claudia was an Italian nurse working inside a refugee camp. Claudia was different from any woman I had been with before or since her. She was short, barely 5'3", overweight at least 30 pounds, with breasts and a stomach that could be described as pillow-shaped. She had dark brown eyes and almost black hair. I've always preferred athletic, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, so it surprised me that I ended up in bed with this Rubensian Italian that night. Surprised, but pleased. Claudia was a very liberated lover. She guided me to all points to please her. The only problem? Sometimes she said it in Italian. I made a mental note to start learning the language if we continued dating. That's what we did. We met at least 3 times a week, and often I would arrive at my tent after a long day to find Claudia already in bed. On the bedside table, there was usually a plate of bread and cheese and an open bottle of wine. She was naked reading a book. We ate a little bread, a little cheese, drank a little wine, and then made love. We were together throughout my 2nd year in Kenya. It all ended when Claudia went home to visit her family, which I assumed meant her mother, father, and everyone else and sisters. You'd think that after a full year together, we'd have shared such personal information by now, but other than her knowing I had a son, we knew very little about each other. Imagine my surprise when I was sitting in a bar with a bottle of beer and one of her colleagues, a nurse who, I think, was trying to flirt with me in Claudia's absence, let it slip that Claudia had gone to visit her husband and son in Florence. When Claudia returned 3 weeks later, she tried to convince me that she and her husband had an agreement. When that didn't work, she offered another argument. If I didn't use her body, then one of the other men in the camp would, so it didn't matter if it was me or someone else, her husband would still be a cuckold. None of the arguments worked, and we finally agreed to remain friends. I returned to a relatively celibate lifestyle. One day, about 2 months after our breakup, and without any warning, Claudia came to my tent with a little boy. This is Joseph. Until that morning, Joseph lived with his mother in a refugee camp. 9 months ago, Joseph lived with his father, mother, and 2 older brothers in a small village near Juba, Sudan. One of the tribal leaders associated with the regime in Khartoum stormed into the village, killing every man, boy, and girl under 10 years of age, all in the name of Allah. Joseph only survived because his father hid him. Joseph and his mother Sarah joined a long line of refugees to Kenya. Sarah was pregnant. Her only reason for living was the desire to bring her youngest son to safety. The morning Claudia brought Joseph to me, his mother was found dead in her small tent. Claudia asked me to shelter Joseph. I agreed, set up a cot in the corner of the tent with a makeshift curtain for privacy, and took Joseph with me to my office every day. He sat on a chair against the wall. I taught him English and arithmetic. Amanda Peters, our camp dentist, guessed that Joseph was about 9 years old. Joseph had been with me for just over a year when I was scheduled to meet Bobby in Rome for 2 weeks for our annual summer vacation. I was still working through all the bureaucratic hurdles to officially adopt Joseph, and he wouldn't be allowed to leave the country without the right paperwork. The only option was to ask Claudia to look after him. She agreed, and I went to Rome. It was the third time Bobby had met me in Europe. The first time was in Barcelona, the second in Paris. This time we spent 2 weeks in Rome and its environs. The first 2 times we spent together were good. Jenny and John did a great job raising Bobby. He did not hold a grudge against me for a long absence. I wrote to him once every 2 weeks and received a letter from him at least once a month. Not so bad for a teenager. The 2 weeks we spent together in Italy were fun. Bobby had good news. Georgetown University had offered him a partial scholarship to play baseball. With the money I saved for his education, he could have graduated with little or no debt. I returned to Locachoggio and was greeted by a worried Claudia. 2 days before I returned, Joseph ran away while she was at work, despite our clear instructions to stay in or near her tent. He was a 10-year-old boy, so he might have wanted to explore the area. He was last seen at a market in the city. We put up posters, offered rewards, and achieved nothing. The market swallowed him up. I hired a local retired police officer to look for him. I increased the reward. After 3 months and almost $10,000 spent searching for Joseph, I had to give up. If he is still alive, most likely he is somewhere in Sudan, with a Kalashnikov in his hands. Losing Joseph was the last straw. I applied for a position I heard about at a law firm in Herndon, Virginia. Since Bobby would be attending Georgetown in the fall, I had the opportunity to be close to him again. My job at a law firm was helping NGOs, nonprofit organizations, apply for grants from USAID. If the NGO's mission complements one of the many U.S. government foreign assistance programs and the NGO is uniquely qualified to accomplish the task, USAID may provide it with funds. My responsibility, along with my assistant and occasional intern, was to assist smaller or inexperienced NGOs in developing grant applications in accordance with USAID financial management rules and criteria. I met Beth Rogers at my gym. She was a member of the volleyball team that my friends convinced me to join. Beth was a friend of these same friends, and it was probably a set-up meeting. Beth was a lawyer in Washington and a very attractive woman. 5 feet 10 inches tall, she was only 4 inches shorter than me. Obviously, she played volleyball in college. She was that good and hadn't lost any of her muscle in the 7 years since graduating. Many women in the sports club considered me a good match. 4 years in Kenya gave me the perfect shape. I was tall and fit. I treated women with respect, and the few I had dated seemed to appreciate my gentlemanly manners. When word spread about my time in Africa, it created an aura of mystery around me, reminiscent of the hero of an adventure novel, which appealed to both women and men. Beth and I started dating, and after a few months I began to understand that this was the woman I loved and could marry. After 10 months of dating, I asked Beth to marry me. She said yes, and we set a wedding date for the following June. The wedding was supposed to be small, about 40 guests. Beth had already gone through the wedding of her life with her first husband, a law school classmate. This marriage lasted 3 years before their careers, and Beth's reluctance to have children led them to mutually decide to divorce. As the wedding date approached, Beth and I spent the weekend at a B&B in the Blue Mountains, enjoying a sunny Sunday while writing our marriage vows before we had to check out. "That's it, I'm finished." Beth put down her notepad and went to the mini fridge to get a bottle of champagne. We agreed not to drink until we finished our vows. While Beth was making herself a mimosa, I put down my notebook, picked it up, and started reading. "Hey, that's not fair. You can't read mine until you finish yours." I held the notepad to the side as she tried to snatch it from my hands. "Just enjoy your drink. You know you're a better articulate person than I am, and I need some inspiration. Besides, I don't want us to repeat the same things." This was enough for Beth, and she sat on the balcony to enjoy the sun. Beth's vows were beautiful, a wonderful combination of traditional vows and her own words to highlight our love, but something was missing. I went out onto the balcony and sat next to Beth. "Hey, honey, what about giving up all others? Have you forgotten about this?" "No, Robert. I didn't want to promise something that I couldn't be absolutely sure I'd keep. It's the lawyer in me, I guess." Beth's words didn't sink in right away. How could two people who considered themselves smart people not discuss such an important topic 2 weeks before the wedding? In our defense, I've known couples who never discussed it until it was too late. "What do you mean can't be sure?" "Well, for now and for the near future, yes, you are the only man I want in my bed. But what will happen in 5, 10, or 20 years? Are you so sure that you will refuse all others?" "I hope so, and I can't imagine being okay with my wife spreading her legs in front of another man." "Robert, you are so rude. Spread your legs, please. Okay, let's put it this way, I don't want my wife to have sex with another man." Beth said stunningly, "It's just sex." "But I want my wife to have sex only with me." "Look at it this way, Robert. When you cheated on Jenny with that woman, did it change the way you felt about her? Wouldn't you be happier if Jenny realized it was just sex and didn't divorce you?" Wow, I wasn't ready to answer Beth's question immediately. This was something I had to seriously think about before answering. I realized I couldn't think about it and write my vows at the same time, so I just wrote something stupid in my notebook and grabbed a bottle of wild turkey off the shelf. With a good dose of the golden liquid in hand, I sat down on the lounge chair next to Beth, looked at the mountains, and began to reflect. Beth sat quietly with her hand on mine, obviously pleased with herself, thinking that her legal logic and sweet words had convinced me. We returned home that evening. I drove Beth to her apartment and kissed her deeply. "Thank you for a wonderful weekend." I mean this in several ways. Sure, the sex was great, but I also knew that Beth had saved me from making the second biggest mistake of my life. You see, I really thought about Beth's words was the fact that I cheated on Jenny a good enough reason for her to divorce, and I came to the only honest answer: yes. If Jenny had not divorced me, it would have meant that she would have accepted my complete and total disrespect for her and the promises we made to each other. All Jenny ever did was love me and give me a son, and I repaid her by destroying this beautiful woman. I didn't just make one mistake. I deliberately allowed our romance to reach perverted heights. I realized that even if Beth promised to give up all others, that promise would be empty, and throughout our life together, I would worry every time she had to leave for a meeting or work late. The words Beth spoke as she sat on that porch convinced me that she meant when and not if she would cheat. On Monday night, I broke off our engagement. I think Beth really loved me. She practically fell apart when I told her there wouldn't be a wedding. A small part of her was also upset that she could not convince me that I was wrong in my thinking. Her lawyer brain couldn't accept that her arguments weren't as compelling as she thought. My life began to change strangely. Beth and I had so many mutual friends and activities. It would be difficult not to run into her almost anywhere I went. Luckily, Bobby was scheduled to graduate from Georgetown in a week, and I had opportunities elsewhere. I was going to be a wanderer again. May 30th, 1999. I was standing at the stadium. Bobby had just received his diploma, and I was waiting to congratulate him when I heard her voice. "Hi, Bob." She hugged me. John was standing right next to her. He extended his hand for me to shake. "Bobby said you were getting married at the end of this month. I was hoping to meet this Beth." We broke off the engagement. "Oh, sorry. Bobby talked so much about her." "What happened?" As soon as those words left her lips, Jenny felt visibly uncomfortable. She quickly tried to correct her mistake. "Sorry, you don't have to answer that. It's none of my business." "Everything is fine. We were unable to agree on fidelity to each other throughout our marriage." Jenny looked at me. I instantly knew what she was thinking. I even laughed. No, not me this time." Beth thought you were stupid to divorce me, thought you and I loved each other enough to forgive my cheating. I didn't agree with her. I said that you did absolutely the right thing. Jenny and John looked at me, not knowing what to say in response. They were saved by Bobby, who approached us with a diploma in his hand and a huge smile on his face. Mom, he hugged her. John, he shook his stepfather's hand. Dad, he shook my hand, but I pulled him towards me for a hug. Thank you to all three of you for helping me achieve this. Jenny kissed him on the cheek and said to me, "We're going to take Bobby to dinner. Would you like to join us?" "No, thank you. You three go and have a good time. I already have plans, but thanks anyway." I didn't have any plans, but I also didn't need to be the fourth wheel. With the end of my engagement to Beth and Bobby finishing his studies and planning to return to Michigan, I had the opportunity to accept the offer that had come a few months ago, if the offer is still valid. It was, and a month later I went again to meet the unknown, this time in Haiti. There were high hopes that the newly elected President Aristide would bring stability and order to Haiti. But as with every previous Haitian dictator, hope proved false and died too soon. Haiti is stifled by poverty and disease. Malaria, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and many other diseases are widespread. Leaders come and go, poverty remains forever. Corruption is widespread there. Almost everyone who wears a badge or has a title is extending their hand for a bribe, and this still does not guarantee that supplies will reach those in need. 15 months of work in Haiti with various medical organizations had little effect in reducing suffering. After all those years in Sudan and over a year in Haiti, my spirit was depressed and I needed a break. I reached out to everyone I knew and got a job in the city where it all began, Pharmacioption in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I bought 40 acres of woods near the town of Paw Paw and built a house. June 29th, 2001. Bobby's wedding is tomorrow. Bobby met his future wife at the Veterans Hospital while John Fry was being treated for cancer. Gail is a beautiful girl, 3 years older than Bobby, smart as a whip and cute as a button. Bobby was only 23 when he married Gail. Given my own experience, I was a little worried when he told me about the wedding. A few days before the wedding, I sat down with him and told him about my affair. "Dad, thanks for sharing this. I kind of guessed it was something like that, although you and Mom never said it. I know I'm young, but I'm still older than you were when you married your mom, and I had a few girlfriends while I was in college, so it's not the same. Besides, just knowing what happened to your marriage due to cheating makes me understand how I can avoid the same fate." Smart guy, my Bobby. I missed the rehearsal dinner the day before the wedding. As the father of the groom, I had no obligations other than paying for their honeymoon in Cancun. The wedding and reception were beautiful. Gail's parents arranged everything perfectly. I was sitting with her parents when Jenny came up to me and asked if I wanted to dance. "Is John okay with this?" I asked. "Yes, he trusts me." We danced to slow music. I didn't hold Jenny too close. John could trust Jenny, but I didn't trust myself even after all these years. Jenny started the conversation. "Bobby has grown up to be a wonderful young man, and I like Gail. You and John did a great job while I was overseas. Thank you. I think it really helped when you came back and lived near him while he was at Georgetown. John and I were worried about him during his senior year of high school. That's why I wrote to you and asked you to be involved in your son's life again." "When did you write?" "A year before you moved to Washington. I sent you a letter explaining why John and I were worried." "I didn't receive the letter. I will remember a letter from you." "Then why did you come back?" "I wanted to reconnect with Bobby. 4 years was too long. The fact that he was accepted into Georgetown and I had a job in Washington, it was fate. Everything worked out." Jenny squeezed my hand and shoulder a little tighter, but we still remained at a distance from each other. "Everything worked out. Bobby was so happy when he found out you were coming back. Why did you go to Africa in the first place? I never understood this." "Repentance. Old Catholic wine." "Repentance? For what?" "For cheating on you. for ruining the best thing a man can have. But you should have realized that I forgave you long before you left for Africa. But I couldn't forgive myself. The music ended, and I decided it was a good time to leave. I walked Jenny back to the table where John was sitting, thanked him for letting me dance with his wife, said goodbye to Gail's parents, kissed the bride, and hugged Bobby. 3 months later, John was back in the hospital. The cancer had returned. It turned out that this was most likely due to exposure to Agent Orange while he served in Vietnam. Bobby told me it was a terminal case. They were going to stop treatment and let John return home. I managed to persuade the guards to let me into his room an hour before the start of the visits. I sat down next to his bed, and we had our second real conversation. I thanked him for everything he had done to raise Bobby and told him that I knew Bobby would help Jenny raise the girls in a way that John would be proud of. Yes, I know Bobby will do everything possible for his sisters. It's just a shame I won't get to see them grow up. John's eyes filled with tears, but he was too courageous to shed a tear in front of me. The most disgusting thing is that I got this cancer because of this damn war. We didn't achieve anything there. This was not the first time I had heard a Vietnam veteran express regret. John, when I was in Sudan, I spent time with an Australian pilot who was a veteran of that war. He once told me that he had a different opinion. We had to stop those damn communists somewhere, and you Yankees took the brunt of the fight. The Soviets and Mao were behind it all. If only they captured South Vietnam in 1960, they would have gone straight south to the Philippines, like the Japanese did in the 40s. The problem with that war was that the only person who tried to win the war was Ho Chi Minh. John was silent for a while. We both sat silently until he broke the silence. Well, your Australian friend was right about one thing. We actually fought with one hand tied behind our backs. I'll think about what he said. Damn, what else do I have to do? We were silent for a little longer. This time I broke the silence. I'm not going to be a vulture. What do you mean? I'm not going to be around waiting to get back to Jenny. John laughed, although it gave him a coughing fit. I didn't think you would. Besides, I'll be dead, so what will I even know? Well, I'll help Bobby with his responsibilities, but I'm not going to replace you. That's because I'm irreplaceable. This time he only grinned and didn't laugh. I looked at the clock on the wall. There were 10 minutes left before the visits began. It was time for me to leave. John thanked me for the visit and promised to think about what the Australian had told me. 2 weeks later, on November 2nd, John Fry died at home. Under different circumstances, I think we could have become great friends. July 16th, 2002. The class of '72 held their 30-year reunion. Jenny stood at the bar with 3 female cheerleaders. They all looked good, but Jenny looked the best. Since I needed a drink, I couldn't avoid them. Shelley Collins, née Phillips, was still a flirt. She saw me walking towards the bar and grabbed my hand. Bobby Long, God, you're still so handsome. Shelley pressed her double Ds against my stomach and hugged me tightly, all the while rubbing those 2 silicone bags against me. I ordered a bourbon and chatted with the ladies for a few minutes. In the end, Jenny saved me. Just like at Bobby's wedding, I have to ask you to dance again. Let's go, Bobby, let's go dance. Unlike the dance at Bobby's wedding, Jenny held me close this time. I expected you to be at least a little excited. Didn't Shelley make you want? I'm not a fan of this look. Why are you thinking about having surgery? Jenny looked at me. Do you think I need to fix something? Never. Then why did you disappear? I haven't seen you since John died. For 2 reasons. First of all, I promised John that I wouldn't be a vulture. Secondly, it is no secret that negotiations are underway to merge Pharmaciopjohn with Pfizer. I'm on the team coordinating collaboration with the Pfizer group, and I'm constantly sent to New York and London. Thank God I don't have a wife. I would have gotten divorced for the 2nd time. I wish I could talk to you sometimes. I miss your friendship. Jenny, I could never be your friend. I still love you too much for that. I almost got over it when I was with Beth. I loved her so much. But when it all fell apart, I was back at the starting line. The music ended, and we were still standing on the dance floor, hugging each other, even though the music had ended and the announcer was making announcements. Jenny cried and left. The girls noticed this. Of course, they watched the whole dance and its consequences. They followed Jenny to the toilet. I was left standing alone, looking lost. Maybe I would have followed this evening with something, but I had to fly to London on Sunday morning and didn't have time. I wrote a letter and gave it to Bobby on my way out of town on Sunday morning. Dear Jenny, I'm truly sorry for upsetting you last night, and I'm sorry we won't have a chance to discuss this. I have a plane, and this is not something that can be canceled. When I get back, I'd like to talk to you. I don't want to do this over the phone, email, or any other way other than face-to-face. Maybe we can be friends if that's what you need. Sincerely, Bob. June 14th, 2004. Today, I'm getting married. Bobby is my witness. His daughter is a flower girl. I'm as happy as a pig in mud. 4 months after writing that letter to Jenny, I returned from business trips and we truly became friends. Not friends with benefits and not friends who talk to each other every day, but friends. That is until one warm October day when I received a call from my son. I was sitting in Bell's beer garden, enjoying a glass of beer when my cell phone rang. I invited my son to join me. Bobby sat down at the table, looking upset. Dad, did Mom tell you anything about her health? It scared me, just the way he said it. No, what happened? Mom has breast cancer. Gail taught the girls how to do self-exams, and Mom found the lump. She has surgery tomorrow. How bad is it? Not as bad as it could have been. The doctor thinks they caught it early thanks to Gail. They'll probably have to remove the left breast, though. Bobby told me the details, what, when, and where. The next day, I was in the hospital with a bouquet of flowers. Jenny seemed happy to see me. Her 2 daughters were in the room. Gail and Bobby just left. I was always careful about how difficult it might be for Jenny's daughters if they saw me still around their mother. Would they think I was trying to replace their father? We had a nice chat, considering the circumstances. I left after half an hour. Jenny was tired and needed rest. The good news was that the tumor was removed. The cancer had not spread and doctors thought she would make a full recovery. The next morning, Maggie, Jenny's eldest daughter, came to my apartment. My first thought when I saw the young girl at my door was, oh, she's come to warn me to stay away from her mother. I invited her in and poured her a cup of coffee. You really love my mom, don't you? Yes, I do. I'm pretty sure she's waiting for you to take it to the next level. Why don't you ask her out? I promised your father that I wouldn't do this. I didn't want it to look like I was waiting to take advantage of the situation. 2 years have passed since Dad died. I don't think anyone will consider you a vulture. My sister and I definitely won't do that. And Dad said something before he died. Now it makes sense. He said he hoped Mom would one day stop grieving and find love again. He meant you. Now I understand it. Your father was a good man and loved your mother. You know, Mom loved Dad too. There's no doubt about it. Their marriage was as perfect as it could be. But Mom always had a special place in her heart for you. I could tell by the way she talked to Bobby about his father. There was never any hostility. Do you think having your breasts removed will change the way you feel about them? No, it doesn't change anything. At least for me. Then do us all a favor and ask her out. But if you hurt my mom again, you'll have to deal with me. She said this with a smile, which let me know that she knew I would never make the same mistake again. Needless to say, I called the next day and asked Jenny out on a real date. She said yes, and that was the beginning of our second romance. When I proposed to her 4 months later, she said yes again. That's why I stand at the altar next to my son and watch the most beautiful woman in the world walk towards me. I have no doubt that this time I will give up all others. 15 years later. Did you receive it? I looked up from the computer screen, showing that welfare benefits had been deposited into our account. Jenny smiled at me. Yes, it has arrived. $1969.50. What are you going to do with all this money? Already done. How is it that you spent it without receiving it yet? I assumed yours arrived last month without any problems. I took his word for it. If you can't trust Uncle Sam, who can you trust? You, Bob, I trust. God, how I loved my wife. So don't tell me, did you buy that new gun you were drooling over? No. Mountain bike? No. Come on, Bob, tell me. I took the box out of my desk drawer. The box said Mikamoto. Jenny opened it and found the pearl necklace she had always dreamed of. I took the necklace out of the box and placed it around her neck. Jenny ran and looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Oh, Bob, it's just great. Not as great as you. Go upstairs and get yourself dressed up. Put on that black dress I like so much. I'm taking you to dinner, and today it won't be much fancier than Paw Paw Brewery. By the way, thank you for growing old with me. Jenny laughed. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.